They say the easiest way to kill a man is all at once. A sudden flash of steel, a momentary lapse of breath. But they're wrong. If you kill a man quickly, he dies a martyr in his own mind. He dies thinking he was loved, thinking the world is losing something precious. No, if you truly want to destroy someone, you have to do it atom by atom. You have to dismantle his reality until he's not even sure he exists anymore. My name is Elena, and for 3 years, I was the perfect girlfriend to Elias. I was the one who remembered his mother's birthday, the one who pressed his shirts for his big presentations, the one who sat through his boring work mixers with a smile that never reached my eyes but convinced everyone else. Then came the night of the receipts. It wasn't a movie-style discovery. There was no dramatic, glass-shattering moment. It was just a notification that popped up on his iPad while he was in the shower. A girl named Maya. The messages weren't just sexual, they were architectural. They were building a life together in the shadows of the one I had spent years constructing. Dates, locations, the I love yous that felt like physical blows to my chest. He had the cheek, as they say, to deny it even when I held the screen to his face. He looked me in the eye and lied until his voice cracked. Then he did the one thing I couldn't forgive. He begged. He crawled on the hardwood floor, clutching my knees, sobbing about a lapse in judgment and how I was his anchor. In that moment, looking down at his pathetic, sniveling face, something in me didn't just break, it crystallized. I didn't want him back, and I didn't want to just leave. I wanted to see him unravel. I looked at him, wiped a fake tear from my own eye, and whispered, "I believe you, Elias. We can fix this." That was the first lie of the new era. I sat down that night with a notebook while he slept the peaceful sleep of a forgiven man. I did the math. To move out, to afford a deposit on a luxury flat where he couldn't find me, and to furnish it from scratch with the life I deserved, I needed 8 months of aggressive saving. 8 months. 243 days. I created a calendar. Each day had a task. Some were small cuts, tiny, irritating inconveniences designed to erode his sanity. Others were structural hits, moves designed to destroy his social standing and his career. I started with the most intimate violation I could think of. The next morning, as he whistled in the shower, feeling reborn by my forgiveness, I took his toothbrush. I walked into the bathroom, stood over the loo bowl, and submerged the bristles in the stagnant, bacteria-ridden water. I held it there for a full minute, watching the porcelain. I tapped it dry on the side of the basin and put it back in the holder. When he came out, smelling of expensive soap, and shoved that brush into his mouth, I watched him from the doorway. I felt a surge of electricity so potent it was almost erotic. He tasted the filth of his own betrayal, and he thought it was just mint. "You okay, babe?" he asked, foam dripping from his chin. "I've never been better," I said, and I meant it. But the toothbrush was just the appetizer. I needed to isolate him. I needed to make sure that by the time I left, there wasn't a single soul left in this city who would offer him a couch to sleep on. I started with his parents, the two people who thought he was a saint. I didn't call them in a rage. I invited them over for a healing dinner. I cooked his favorite, beef bourguignon. I let it simmer until the meat was like leather. I accidentally oversalted it until it was nearly inedible. "I'm so sorry," I whispered at the table, looking down at my plate, my lip trembling. I can't seem to focus lately, ever since I found out about the other girl." The silence that followed was deafening. Elias froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. His mother's eyes went wide. His father's face turned a shade of brick I'd never seen before. "Elena," Elias hissed, "we said we wouldn't." "I know," I sobbed, the performance flowing out of me like silk. "I'm trying so hard to be strong for you, Elias. I really am. I keep seeing her name every time I close my eyes. I ran from the table, locking myself in the bathroom. I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of the tub and checked my bank account. Another $200 had been transferred from our joint house fund to my private offshore account. I listened through the door as his mother began to scream at him. Phase 1 was complete. I had planted the seed of his ruin in the very soil that raised him. But there were still 7 months and 3 weeks to go, and I was just getting started on his mind.
By the second month, the house had stopped being a sanctuary and transformed into a psychological cage. Elias didn't know the bars were being welded shut around him. He just knew that the air felt thinner, the shadows longer, and his own memory felt like a moth-eaten tapestry. This was the phase I called the erosion, where I moved from hurting his pride to dismantling his reality. I began with his physical world. It is terrifying how much a man's confidence relies on the simple certainty of knowing where his keys are. I started migrating his life. Every morning brought a new, quiet crisis. I would wake up at 5 a.m., move his car keys from the bowl by the door to the pocket of a winter coat in the back of the closet, or drop them into a box of cereal in the pantry. When the inevitable panic started, the frantic checking of pockets, the tossing of sofa cushions, I would stand in the kitchen, calmly sipping tea, wearing a mask of deep, furrowed brow concern. "Elias, honey, you're shaking," I'd whisper, stepping toward him as he spiraled. "You put them in the cereal box yesterday, too. Don't you remember? We laughed about it for 10 minutes. He hadn't, of course, because it hadn't happened. But when he finally found them exactly where I said, the blood would drain from his face. I was planting the seeds of a neurological breakdown, and he was watering them with his own self-doubt. I even started forgetting to tell him about phone calls from his boss or canceling his dental appointments behind his back, then watching him stammer into the phone, trying to explain why he'd missed a meeting he never knew existed. But the true cruelty lay in the midnight inquisition. Sleep deprivation is a weapon of war for a reason. It breaks the will and muddies the logic. Every night, just as he drifted into that deep restorative sleep, usually around 3:15 a.m., I would start. I didn't scream. I would just lay next to him and sob quietly, a rhythmic, haunting sound. When he eventually woke up, bleary-eyed and desperate, I would launch into a crisis of faith. "I just can't stop thinking about what Maya said to you in those texts," I'd whisper, the bedside lamp clicking on to blind him. "Did you love the way she touched you more than me? Tell me the truth, Elias. I need to hear the details if I'm going to heal." "Elena, it's 3 a.m, he'd groan, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "We talked about this for 4 hours yesterday. I'm exhausted." "I know, but I just feel so unsafe," I'd reply, my voice trembling with practiced precision. "If you really loved me, you'd want to help me through this, unless you're still thinking about her." And so he would talk. For 2-3 hours, he would reassure me, beg for my trust, and explain himself until the sun began to peek through the blinds. By the time he had to leave for work, he was a zombie. I, on the other hand, would take a stress relief nap the second his car pulled out of the driveway, dreaming of the day I would finally be gone. While his brain was fogging, his wallet was thinning. I became a ghost in his finances. I began opening his parcels, packages from Amazon, bank statements, tax documents. I'd read them, memorize his account numbers, and then dispose of them in a dumpster 3 blocks away. He missed a credit card payment, then another. I forgot to mention the late notices that arrived in the mail. When his card was finally declined at a dinner with his colleagues, I stepped in with a look of immense public pity. "It's okay, Elias. I know you've been struggling with your memory lately. I'll pay for the table." I didn't mention that I was paying with the money I'd borrowed from his wallet over the last 8 weeks. I had a hidden stash in a hollowed-out book that was now over $4,000. He was essentially paying for the privilege of being humiliated by me. As the 3rd month approached, he looked like a shell of a man, gray-skinned, sunken eyes, and a permanent twitch in his left hand. He was losing his friends, his money, and his grip on what was real. He thought I was his only lifeline in a world that had suddenly turned hostile. He didn't realize I was the one who had turned the tide. And just as he was starting to accept this new broken version of himself, I decided it was time to move from his mind to his heart. I was about to make sure he had no one left to turn to but the ghost I was becoming. By the 5th month, Elias was no longer a man. He was a walking open wound. He had become entirely dependent on me to navigate his own life, a life I was systematically deconstructing. But a man with no friends is a man with no witness to his suffering, and I needed to ensure that when the end came, there would be no one to hear him scream. This was the phase of the social execution. I began with his best friend, Mark. They had been brothers in all but blood for 20 years. To ruin Elias, I had to poison the well of that history. I started small, sending Mark worried late-night texts. "Mark, Elias is acting so strange. He's becoming aggressive and then forgetting it happened. I'm scared to be alone with him, but please don't tell him I said anything. He'd be so humiliated." I wasn't just lying, I was crafting a narrative of a man in the midst of a violent mental collapse. The masterstroke, however, was Mark's wedding. Elias was the best man. He had spent weeks agonizing over a speech that was supposed to honor 2 decades of friendship. On the morning of the ceremony, as Elias stood before the mirror adjusting his tuxedo, looking more like a corpse in a suit than a celebrant, I struck. I didn't yell. I simply sat on the edge of the bed and began to shake. "I can't go," I whispered, my eyes fixed on the wall. "I saw her. Elias, I saw Maya. She was parked at the end of the driveway this morning. She's following me. She knows about today. She's going to be at the church." "Elena, that's impossible," he said, dropping his cufflinks, his voice hovering between frustration and panic. "You're calling me a liar?" I turned my gaze at him, my voice cold and sharp as a razor. "After everything you put me through, you're choosing a party over my safety? If you leave this house today, don't bother coming back. I can't be with someone who protects his ego instead of his partner." I gave him the ultimate ultimatum, his history or his penance. He chose the penance. He sat on the floor of our bedroom for 6 hours, missing the ceremony, the photos, and the speeches, holding my hand while I feigned a catatonic state. His phone vibrated incessantly on the nightstand. 42 missed calls from Mark, a dozen from his own father. He ignored them all. By the time midnight came, and I recovered and told him I felt better, the damage was done. Mark blocked him on everything. His parents stopped calling. I had officially severed his last tie to the outside world. He was now adrift in an ocean, and I was the only life raft he had left. With his social life dead, I turned back to the physical. The toothbrush was a daily ritual now, a morning baptism in the filth of the loo bowl that he swallowed without a second thought. But I wanted more. I began a campaign of culinary sabotage. I knew Elias was allergic to shellfish, though not fatally so. I started incorporating ground shell shrimp into the healthy smoothies I made him every morning. Not enough to send him to the hospital, but enough to keep him in a state of constant low-grade hives and respiratory distress. He went to the doctor, who found nothing but stress-related inflammation. I sat in the corner of the exam room, nodding sadly, whispering about how he had been drinking heavily lately, another lie that went into his permanent medical record. I was building a paper trail of a man who was falling apart, making it impossible for anyone to believe me if he ever tried to tell the truth about me. The financial bleed had reached its peak. I had stopped contributing to our shared expenses months ago, claiming my therapy was too expensive. In reality, I was siphoning 40% of his paycheck directly into a private account. I watched him stress over the rising utility bills, watched him skip meals to ensure I could get the help I needed. He was broke, he was sick, he was friendless, and he was losing his job. One evening, he came home early, his eyes hollow. "I got fired, Alina," he whispered, collapsing onto the sofa. "They said my performance was erratic and my hygiene was lacking." I sat next to him, pulling his head onto my lap. I stroked his hair and felt the grease and the sweat, and I felt a surge of intensity that made my heart race. I had taken his pride, his money, his friends, and his career. All that was left was his mind. I cooed, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "It's okay, Elias. You don't need them. I have you. I'm the only one who truly knows you." He clutched my.
The 7th month ended not with a bang, but with a terrifying clinical silence. Elias was now a ghost haunting his own life. He spent his days sitting in the dark of our living room, staring at a television that wasn't turned on, his fingers twitching rhythmically against his knees. He was a man who had been hollowed out, and I was the one who had scraped the marrow from his bones. This was the beginning of the ghost protocol. I started moving out, but I did it like a thief in the night. Every time Elias went for his government-mandated job seeker meetings I knew would be fruitless because I had surreptitiously edited his digital resume to include glaring, embarrassing typos and fake employment gaps, I filled the trunk of my car. I didn't take the big things yet. I took the soul of the house. I took the spare light bulbs, the batteries from the remotes, the extra blankets, and the spices from the back of the pantry. I wanted the house to feel like it was dying along with his spirit. He would walk into a room and feel a draft that hadn't been there before. He'd reach for a towel and find the linen closet strangely empty. "Elena, have we always been this short on things?" he asked one evening, his voice thin and reedy. "The economy is hard, Elias," I replied, not looking up from my laptop as I finalized the lease on my new loft. "And since you lost your job, I've had to sell a few things to keep us afloat." Another lie. I hadn't sold a thing. I was merely relocating my life, piece by piece, to a place where he would never be invited. I watched him apologize. He actually apologized to me for being a burden, tears welling in his sunken eyes. I just nodded and told him to go brush his teeth. I had dipped that brush in the loo bowl twice that morning. It was becoming my favorite part of the day, a silent communion of filth that only I was invited to. But the psychological gaslight finale was where I truly outdid myself. I started using a secondary phone to send myself threatening messages, then showing them to him in a panic. "Look, Elias, someone is watching the house. They say they know what you did to Maya." He became a prisoner in his own home. He spent his nights pacing the hallway with a kitchen knife, terrified that a vengeful ghost from his past was coming for him. I would sit in bed, listening to his frantic footsteps, and feel a cold, sharp joy. I had turned his guilt into a physical monster that followed him from room to room. I wasn't just ruining his life, I was rewriting his internal monologue into a horror story. As the final week approached, I became overly friendly with his landlord. Elias didn't know that the rent hadn't been paid in 2 months, despite the money he had been giving me. I had been pocketing it. I told the landlord that Elias had developed a substance issue and was becoming unpredictable, and that I was planning to leave for my own safety. I ensured that the eviction notice would be served exactly 48 hours after I vanished. I wanted him not just homeless, but branded as a dangerous tenant. The night before the final move, I cooked him one last meal. It was the same beef bourguignon I had ruined 7 months prior. This time, I made it perfectly. I laced it with wine, butter, and enough of his own crushed-up sedatives to ensure he would sleep through a hurricane. As he ate, he looked at me with a terrifyingly pure devotion. "I don't deserve you, Elena," he whispered, his head nodding forward as the drugs began to take hold. "You stayed when everyone else left. You're the only good thing I have left." "I know, Elias," I said, my voice as sweet as honey, "and that's why it's going to hurt so much." He was unconscious before his head hit the plate. I didn't help him up. I let him slump there, his face pressed into the cold gravy. I spent the next 6 hours in a whirlwind of motion. The moving truck I had hired arrived at midnight. 4 men, paid in cash, moved the sofa, the bed, the TV, and every single scrap of my existence out of that house while Elias lay drugged and snoring in the kitchen. I took the curtains, I took the light fixtures, I even took the shower curtain. By 5 a.m., the house was a hollowed-out shell of drywall and echoing floorboards. I stood in the middle of the empty living room, the sun just beginning to bleed through the window frames. I looked at the man slumped in the kitchen chair, surrounded by nothing. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He looked like the receipt he tried to hide from me. I walked into the bathroom one last time. I took his toothbrush, performed the final ritual in the loo bowl, and then I didn't put it back. I took a piece of duct tape and fastened the wet, filthy brush to the center of the kitchen table, right in front of his sleeping face. Beside it, I placed a single high-definition tablet plugged into the wall so it wouldn't die. On the screen was a play button. I took one last look at the ruins of Elias. I didn't feel pity. I felt the weight of 8 months of labor finally lifting off my shoulders. I turned the key in the lock for the last time, snapped it off in the barrel so he couldn't even leave through the front door without a locksmith, and walked down the stairs to the waiting car. I was a ghost now, and ghosts don't look back. The sun rose on the 8th month, October 12th, his birthday. The light didn't crawl into the house, it invaded it, harsh and clinical, bouncing off the bare white walls of a home that had been stripped of its soul. Elias groaned, his neck stiff from sleeping at the kitchen table. The sedatives I'd slipped into his wine left a metallic, chemical tang on his tongue. He blinked, expecting to see me at the stove making him pancakes. He expected the smell of coffee and the warmth of a lived-in home. Instead, he saw the dust motes dancing in an empty room. He stood up, his legs shaking, and the first thing he saw was the kitchen table. It was the only piece of furniture I'd left behind because the leg was wobbly, and I didn't want it in my new life. Taped to the center of that table, like a morbid religious relic, was his toothbrush. It was still damp. Beside it sat the tablet, its screen glowing with a single large play button. Elias reached out, his hand trembling, and pressed it. The video didn't start with a scream. It started with a montage. It was a time-lapse I had hidden in the bathroom cabinet over the last 200 days. The footage was grainy, but clear. It showed me, morning after morning, in my silk robe, calmly dipping his toothbrush into the toilet bowl, swirling it around, and placing it back with a smile. Elias gagged. He clutched his throat, the memory of that minty, foul taste over the last 8 months suddenly manifesting as a physical sickness. He fell to his knees, vomiting onto the floor I had waxed just for this moment, so it would be easier for the landlord to clean. But the video continued. My voice came over the speakers, calm and melodic, like a bedtime story. "Happy birthday, Elias," the recording said. "While you were sleeping, I moved. I took the furniture, the savings, and the person you thought I was. But I didn't want to leave you with nothing. I wanted to leave you with the truth." The screen split. On one side, it showed his bank statements, the $42,000 I'd siphoned from his account, shown line by line, moving from his account to mine. On the other side, it showed the emails I'd sent to his boss, the anonymous tips about his drug use and mental instability. It showed the texts I had sent to Mark, the lies that had severed his oldest friendship. You thought you broke me when you cheated with Maya, but you didn't break me, you built me. I turned you into the architect of your ruin. Every accident, every forgotten uniform, every sleepless night we spent talking, that was me. I wasn't healing us, I was erasing you. The final frame of the video was a photo of the receipts I had found 8 months ago, overlaid with a picture of his new eviction notice and the police report I had filed an hour ago for the stolen jewelry I'd planted in his car. The front door is locked from the outside, Elias. The key is broken in the lock. By the time you find a way out, the landlord will be here with the police. You're broke, you're jobless, and everyone you love thinks you're a monster. The video ended with a shot of me at the airport, blowing a kiss to the camera. I'm a ghost now, and ghosts don't have hearts to break. Elias screamed. He threw the tablet at the wall, but the silence that followed was even louder. He ran to the window, shouting for help, but the neighbors had long ago learned to ignore the unstable man in apartment 4B. I was already 300 miles away, sitting in my new loft, watching the sunrise over a different city. My new toothbrush was still in its plastic wrap. My bank account was full. My phone was a clean slate. I took a deep breath of fresh, clean air that didn't smell like damp uniforms or old lies. I picked up my pen and crossed out the final date on my calendar. The construction was over. The ruin was complete. And for the first time in 8 months, I finally brushed my teeth and felt clean.